Ken, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here today to introduce Kathryn Petralia. And our topic today is going to be FinTech and basically the idea of impact of FinTech in Atlanta and the future of FinTech or financial technology. So as we bring Kathryn on the stage with us, I want to give a little background about Kathryn. She is exactly the right person to talk about this topic. She's the president and co-founder of Cabbage Inc. here in Atlanta, a leading global financial services, cash flow technology, and data platform for small businesses. And very timely, the company just recently announced its closure of its acquisition by American Express just last week. Before co-founding Cabbage, Kathryn spent nearly 15 years with FinTech and e-commerce startups. After she graduated from Furman with an English degree, Kathryn pursued her interest in technology to launch a number of successful startups. She also served as vice president of strategy for Revolution Money, which interestingly was also acquired by American Express. And she was a director of corporate development for CompuCredit. In 2017, she was named to Forbes' list of the world's most powerful women. And she's also recently started another company called Drum, a platform that connects people and their passions with the people they know and love. Now, Kathryn's also been very supportive in our community. She serves on the boards of CARE USA, the Fannie Mae Advisory Board, the Woodruff Arts Center, Pad Split, and the Atlanta Chamber Music Festival. So please join me in welcoming Kathryn Petralia, one of our leading technology executives in the community.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Well, thank you, Kathryn, for joining us. So let's start out. Financial technology, FinTech is, as we know, hot in Atlanta. I think in the state of Georgia, we have 93 FinTech companies, including 8 publicly traded companies, which apparently have a combined market capitalization of over $22 billion. But a lot of our audience may wonder, how do we define FinTech? So let's start out. Give us a definition from your perspective, Kathryn, of what is FinTech?
I think there's this idea that FinTech is new. FinTech actually started in the 50s in Atlanta because the Fed decided to try automated payments, which we now know as ACH, and they did it in the Atlanta region. That's one of the reasons that FinTech is so big, and payments in particular is so big in Atlanta. This stat may be a little outdated, but something around 80% of all electronic payment transactions that happen in the US flow through Atlanta-based businesses. So when I think about FinTech, I think about any technology that is being used to make a customer experience better for a financial services product. I think banks are all FinTechs. They may be using older technology, but I still think it falls into that category. Typically, people, when they say FinTech, are talking about new businesses, new startups that, in the last 10 years have tried to change the way financial services products are being delivered.
So I want to come back and talk some about Atlanta and FinTech, but it's interesting too about how you got involved in FinTech, because you were an English major at Furman University and you came out, started working with startup companies. Tell us a little bit more about how you got an interest in the FinTech market.
It was 100% accidental, as is almost everything I've ever done. I was studying literature in graduate school when a family friend, who actually was the former CEO of Equifax, so that's sort of how that connection even started, asked me to get involved with the data compression company. This is in 1994, in which he was involved and he and his wife had invested. And so it was my first exposure to how you could possibly use the internet to do something different. In this case, possibly to download some software that you would normally have to use like 15 floppy disks to install, if you remember the days of Windows 95. And so that just kind of sparked my interest in the dot-com era, which I guess was nascent at the time. But I wound up starting an e-commerce company after that and wound up consulting. My company was bought by a consulting firm, and I wound up consulting with the folks at CompuCredit, a long-term Atlanta business that was pioneering how you can use automated decisioning. And they were, I would say, an early FinTech. They were putting their application online. So I sort of got to know the nuts and bolts of that there, and that was the beginning of, I would say, FinTech for me.
So let's start with Cabbage too, because that was after several successful startups that you had. And maybe the best way to start out is to tell the audience what Cabbage does, because I think the company's raised nearly $990 million in debt and equity. It's certainly grown. It's now this transaction with American Express. But let's start out with the fundamentals. What does Cabbage do?
I think it's helpful to tell a story of how Cabbage started. We actually got our start because my co-founder, Rob Frohwein, had the idea that you could use an eBay API that he just launched in 2007, and this is when he had the idea for Cabbage, to make a loan to a small business selling on eBay. That was kind of a crazy idea at the time, but eBay was huge and growing even then. And so he called me up and said, "What do you think?" Well, I thought, consumer lending's been automated since the 90s. Why wouldn't you automate a small business loan? And there we have it. And ignorance was definitely our friend, because we had no idea that no one else was automating small business lending and how hard it was. But it's always nice to not be aware of how tall the mountain is you're about to climb. So that's how we got our start, automating small business lending. And the fun thing is, even though a small percentage of our customers, less than 10%, would be e-commerce providers today, we still have the same exact attention and focus on automation and real-time access to third-party data. And so we realized over time that what we were really solving for our customers was cash flow needs. So helping businesses understand, for them, it's very simple. For small businesses, they just want to know, am I going to have the money next week and next month to do the stuff I think I want to do? And so we built a suite of products, including checking accounts and bill pay, invoicing, card products, and payment acceptance that, combined with a line of credit, really give them a full cash flow management suite. And we're talking about the smallest businesses, the 90% of the 30 million US small businesses that have 20 or fewer employees.
So let's dig a little deeper into Cabbage too, because as with many technology companies here in Atlanta, there were co-founders that you had. Tell us a little bit about how you brought your co-founders together. And obviously you're a woman, you were one of the three co-founders, but the only woman involved there. So tell us a little bit about the dynamic there and how maybe companies should look to find a co-founder. What are some of the qualities that you found are really important?
I tell entrepreneurs this all the time. It's really important to have a partner. I think you can do it. I mean, I would say Atticus at Padsplit is a great example of someone who is a fantastic leader, and he's the founder. But he does have some strong leaders that flank him, I would say, who've been with the business since the early days. So the reason I think partners are so important is because it does sort of round out your skill set. It also gives you another perspective, somebody, against whom you can bounce an idea and say, what do you think about that? And Rob and Mark and I had very different skills. I knew sort of the nuts and bolts of financial services and lending and payments. And I think Mark was an amazing fundraiser. He was so well connected. Tom Noonan was an early investor in our seed round. And we tell this story all the time that Tom invested because he was just tired of Mark calling him and texting him and asking for money. He's like, you know what, just here's the money. I can't take it anymore. And Rob is just such an unbelievable business person. He just really understands, how to put things together, the right questions to ask. He's a visionary. The idea for Cabbage was his. And most of the ideas for the things into which we have moved have really come from Rob. So I think it's important to have, whatever the mix is, to have a mix.
So you've also been involved at Cabbage in the PPP program, which has obviously been instrumental for so many companies. And it almost was a pivot, it seemed like, for the company. Tell us more about that, because it was obviously a new program and you folks sort of jumped in head first, didn't you?
Well, we did. At first is exactly right, because we had no idea what we were getting into. We just knew there was going to be a program, and we heard, thanks so much to Sam Tausig, who runs policy for Cabbage, and he'll be the president one day, I think, of the United States, so make sure you vote for him in like 2045 or whenever he's old enough. But anyway, we were so fortunate to be in the middle of that, and FinTechs were deputized to participate in PPP, and I think the reason really was because the government and the agencies, they knew that it was going to be really hard for traditional banks to serve these small businesses without technology. We saw it play out time and time again. We served 300,000 more than small businesses, get more than $7 billion in PPP funds. And our median PPP loan amount was $12,500. So we were serving the very smallest businesses. Every one of them had a bank account, but they couldn't get a PPP from their bank. Not because the banks are bad guys. They just didn't have the means and the tools to automate that process. So I can't be more proud of the team here at Cabbage that built that PPP machine, as I call it, in about 2.5 weeks. And, it was certainly, we just ran down as many paths as we possibly could, whether it was the platform or whether it was the data that we could use, or whether it was the banks with whom we were partnering, or whether it was pledging to the PPPLF or having short-term capital. Like every day there was just some major issue that arose, but we made it through, and it was just an unbelievable experience.
Well, it's interesting. I think if you look at the statistics, I believe that Cabbage became the second largest PPP lender in the U.S. with nearly 300,000 approved applications that amounted to over $7 billion in small business funding. So you jumped in head first, but you clearly did a great job in building it. So another question that's come up from our audience, and I encourage the audience to continue to chat with us on some interesting questions. But in that same vein, how does alternative financing become more inclusive of vulnerable and underserved communities? Funding for the underserved or the unknown, which seems to be a new area. It's very important, I think, in order for us to be able to see growth from the bottom up in our country.
It's interesting. People often think that Cabbage exists because there was less lending after the global financial crisis. And that actually wasn't true at all. The smallest businesses have always had trouble getting served, which, by the way, I mentioned this earlier, they represent most of the 30 million small businesses in the US. And it's not because the banks don't have the funds to do it. It's because they have a hard time understanding those businesses because it's all manual. It costs a bank the same amount to make a $50,000 loan as it does a $5 million loan. So they focus on the $5 million loans. And that's what really gave us an opportunity to run this business. And it really wouldn't have mattered if it would have been in 1976 or 2036. The same challenges remain. I think what's exciting about FinTech, one of my favorite things about FinTech, is how it does democratize access to financial services for all kinds of people. At Cabbage, for example, we have twice as many women and minority-owned customers in our customer population as exist in the general business owning population. And that there are two reasons for that. One of them is because our algorithms are blind. And the other is because the customers actually feel more comfortable coming to us because they don't feel like they're going to walk into a bank and sit across from a bank manager who's going to judge them in some way. So I think that idea of being blind on both sides is actually really important to those applicants. And it's funny, people don't think about this, but the ATM was actually a really interesting development democratizing access to banking services. And this is in the 70s. And the reason is because people who worked different shifts or worked during the day and didn't have access to banking services because they couldn't get there during bankers' hours. And it really gave everyone a chance to put their money in a bank. And that was a powerful thing at the time. I think today we take it for granted. And in fact, today we hope we never have to go to a bank or an ATM. We just want to use Venmo for everything, which is great. But I think it's a great story of how that democratization is happening over time. And I just had a presentation today from a startup called Yellowbird that's doing training. Basically, I would say it's education and training, financial training for financial literacy. They're targeting, and this is their words, Black and brown Americans, but they believe it's actually great for all young Americans, and it's digital first. And the idea is helping you understand how to use financial services and how to manage your money. And this would have been impossible 20 years ago. There just wasn't a platform for doing this. It would have been too hard to reach people.
So Kathryn, Cabbage has been described as a unicorn, and maybe you can tell the audience what that means, first of all. And secondly is, what was the key to scaling the business? That was another question that's just come in from the audience, because a lot of companies start in our community and they get some financing, but very few are able to scale like you have at Cabbage, and even fewer are able to become unicorns. So walk us through that. How did that happen?
I think it's all about, well, first of all, the unicorn term typically refers to a business that has achieved $1 billion valuation or more. And so, those measurements are always kind of funny because you never know what the terms are of those deals that get them to that point. But that's the idea behind this unicorn moniker, which we don't tend to use that internally ever. But now I guess with the American Express thing, that's not a conversation we're going to be having anyway. But regardless, I think, what was that? I forgot the other part of your question. I'm so sorry.
Well, no, it's how you really became a unicorn. How
scaled. Got it. Sorry. Yeah. So scaling, I think the reason we were able to do that is because of technology. And to put it in perspective, just for PPP, we have one employee for every 800 employees that a bank has, like Chase or Bank of America. So the only way that we were able to serve as many customers as we did, we had prior to PPP deployed more than $10 billion to over 250,000 small businesses and lines of credit and small business loans. And so again, that's something that we couldn't have achieved if we needed people like reviewing paper paper and faxes and applications and walking into customer stores and like checking out the inventory. So that would have been impossible for us to achieve. I think the only way we could scale is through technology and through relationships, because we also had to scale access to capital for ourselves. We had to scale. We did one of the first, I think we did the very first small business non-bank securitizations in the history of securitization. So we really had to push the envelope every step of the way to get access to what we needed to grow and scale.
So you mentioned the American Express deal, and I know that it's closed, but obviously there's parts of it that probably, you can't talk about. But could you give us a quick overview? Here's a company co-founded by you in Atlanta that grows in a short period of time and has a successful transaction with American Express. So walk us quickly through that and maybe how that might impact and change what you're going to end up doing, because you've clearly been very successful as an entrepreneur.
Well, we've always had a crush on American Express, is what I would say. Always thought that what a great brand, serving small businesses, our interests, our goals are very much aligned. And I think this gives an opportunity to accelerate and amplify the work that we've already been doing. American Express is one of the top providers of financial services to small businesses in the U.S. And so I think it's really exciting to help them get to a digital first platform and to help them get beyond the card, which are messages, that they've been saying and delivering to their shareholders and to customers. So I'll be at American Express for, a couple of years, if not longer. And the teams are so excited to work with us. It's just such an amazing organization. They're so transparent and thoughtful, and our cultures are very much aligned. So I think it's going to be a great long-term home for all of us here at Cabbage. For me personally, Rob and I did start another company called Drum, and which you mentioned at the very beginning. And so we're still going to be nurturing that company as long as we have it, which I think will be for a long time. So we're excited about that too. And I also tend to overcommit to like other stuff, like nonprofits and boards or whatever. I think there's an expression, maybe it's Benjamin Franklin, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy person.
Absolutely. Take 30 seconds and tell us about Drum, because as a serial entrepreneur, Kathryn, you and Rob started this company while you were still running a very busy company in Cabbage. What does Drum do?
Well, Drum Technologies is the company. We have two products, Drum and Scout. Drum Technologies is all about scaling word of mouth. Scout, the app, which you can download in the App Store, makes the things you love memorable, shareable, and scalable. Think about the number of times that you recommend things to your friends or to colleagues, things, whether it's an item on Amazon, whether it's a show you just watched, whether it's a book you just read, whether it's a restaurant you love, whether it's a face mask. Who would have thought that that's something we're recommending today? But it's such a clunky way to share and recommend. And Scout gives you a way to sort of store, organize, and curate the things that you love to share with the people you love. Drum, on the other hand, is a referral platform for any business that effectively creates a human affiliate network for all the products and services that are sold online, so that individuals can now get credit for that instead of these BMF affiliate networks that operate digitally.
Well, you clearly have the entrepreneurial spirit in your blood, Kathryn, and which is great for Atlanta. And we're so glad that you're going to be here growing that business and with Cabbage and American Express. So questions come in saying, being the sole female founder, was it challenging to be a woman in the industry? And how do you encourage more female founders? Any thoughts on that?
I never really thought it was challenging. I've been in FinTech and in technology for my whole career, and I never really noticed that I was one of the few women in the room. But I remember we're raising money for Cabbage. It was probably 2009. We'd been to 50 venture firms, all of whom said no, of course, because that's just the way it was for us. And there was a woman that came into the room and she sat at the table. It was the first time a woman was in the room on the other side of the table who wasn't bringing me water. And so I was like, wow, I didn't notice their absence, but I noticed her presence when she was there. And so that was interesting. I don't think it affected us particularly because I did have two male co-founders. So I think it's totally different than being a female solo founder. But I had, this is going to sound inappropriate for a minute, but bear with me while I tell you the super fast story. I was sitting in an event and a woman who is the CEO of Open Table was speaking, and it was like a 7-minute TED Talk all about sort of the hashtag Me Too movement. And I felt myself sort of slinking down in my chair. I'm like, oh no, here we go again. It's hashtag Me Too. And I was embarrassed. And then all of a sudden I realized, and again, bear with me, I'm going to explain what I'm about to say. I was like a Mexican person who voted for Trump, which sounds crazy. Like, you think to yourself, why would someone who is Mexican vote for Trump when he wants to build a wall? Well, the reason I use that metaphor is because I think, folks who came here legally and they see folks coming in illegally, they're like, dude, I worked really hard to get my citizenship. And I think other people should have to do the same thing. And I think that is why you hear those stories from Hispanic, Latinx voters. And so I think it was similar for me. I was like, I worked really hard. I did all this stuff myself. I dealt with the slings and arrows of being the only woman. Y'all, you like step up and grow a pair and, but then I realized that that's not fair. I realized that women need to see women in positions and that they want, that to which they aspire. And I think it's important to help them along. And I always have been. I've always been delighted to help young women who've contacted me over the years. And I think I've become a much stronger advocate for diversity, especially with respect to women over the last several years, as I sort of realized the error of my ways and of my unspoken thoughts.
Great explanation. So let me ask you, a lot of our members, Kathryn, are involved in traditional financial institutions. They're involved with banks. They've started banks. They've been senior executives at banks. They still believe in banks. Some of them still write checks. What advice would you give generally to some of those folks if you were an advisor to the traditional legacy banking institution and you were talking to them and the question was, okay, well, what's this FinTech thing and how do we apply it to our business, or should we even apply it at all? What kind of advice would you give?
I was talking to a PPP customer recently. I've spoken to so many customers over the last 8 months, which has been a really unbelievable experience. And he operates a large consulting firm. By large, I mean, we're talking several $100 million a year in revenue, which is a good sized company who got a PPP through us because he couldn't get it through his bank, which happens to be a local bank with whom I also bank that might be changing its name right now. And he said, he told me that he was a big check writer and a big check depositor, but that he realized during COVID that he couldn't go deposit his checks at the bank anymore. And so he found a different way, but he couldn't do mobile remote deposit for businesses with his particular bank. And so he was like, I need to find another bank. I should be able to do that. They just weren't keeping up with his needs as a business person operating digitally, operating in a mobile environment. And so I think that's sort of a wake-up call to institutions that you need to meet your customers where they are and you need to be prepared to help them with what they need when they need it. Banks are running the risk of becoming a utility because all these fintechs are building their products and services on top of those bank pipes. Because banks have a great ability to move money and they have a great ability to manage the regulatory environment. And so fintechs rely on them for that, but banks are losing their direct connection with their customers because they just can't provide the products and services that they need. So my comment to banks is like, figure it out, make it happen quickly, and don't rely just on partnerships because, in a partnership, neither one of them wakes up every morning thinking about the other partner. Everyone makes it thinking about themselves. So I think it's important to invest in technology for yourself.
So let's talk about other startup companies. Go from the big banks to the small startups. You mentioned at Cabbage talking to a lot of venture funds and investors, and fortunately found some local players to support, and then eventually a lot of additional folks. Is Atlanta a good place to start a technology company, a FinTech company? And what are the challenges that you think we are facing here in Atlanta that we need to begin addressing more affirmatively?
Atlanta is a fantastic place to start any kind of business. In my opinion, I love Atlanta. I've lived here for 28 years. I don't want to live anywhere else for the rest of my life. I really, really love this town. And I love it because it's beautiful, great climate, mountains nearby, such a diverse workforce. There's so many different kinds of people in Atlanta. I don't think anybody outside of Atlanta really feels that way about Atlanta, but I do. And good schools and really kind, friendly, genuine people. That's my favorite thing about Atlanta is people say hi, they smile at you when you're walking down the sidewalk. And I really cherish that part of our culture is Atlanta. And so I think what Atlanta is missing, if you're going to start a company here and you need to raise money, get on a plane. Thank God we have Delta. We spent a lot of, we joke that we made Delta our silent partner because we really had to leave the state to get access to capital. And one of the things I think is local venture investors, they kind of trade on that dearth of capital, and they are able to get lower valuations because folks aren't looking elsewhere. And I think that's it's incumbent upon the entrepreneur to get outside of Atlanta. And now investors in other communities realize what a great place Atlanta is. And somebody from the West Coast is willing to do a seed investment in an Atlanta-based company, or from New York or Boston or wherever all the money folks are. So I think that's an important lesson. And I think what Atlanta needs to do is simply raise the specter of Atlanta and the value of being here. I think a lot of folks hear our Southern accents and they presume some things about us that aren't true. And I think it's important to let them know that we are a rich, vibrant, diverse community with amazing companies and amazing talent. So that's a place that we're a place that should attract a lot of investment.
It's a great answer, and I suspect you're going to get a call from the Metro Atlanta Chamber to recite that for video, because it's a great testimonial. I'm wondering also, a follow-up in that regard, if we're going to see maybe some non-Atlanta companies wanting to come to Atlanta for that reason. I don't know if you've seen some of that trend, but we certainly have seen it. I don't know if you've seen it on your end and whether you think that's going to be the case in FinTech, given the sort of magnetic appeal that probably has taken place in part because of the success of Cabbage.
Well, it's funny. We've seen that for sure. Twitter and Square both have offices in Midtown. So we know Salesforce has a big presence here, although they got there partially by acquiring the company. But I think Atlanta could potentially grow that way. Of course, all bets are off on when people are going to get back into an office anyway. I say speaking in a completely empty office, but I think, there's a lot of attractive things about Atlanta for those companies, and it's a lower cost of living, and so it costs those companies less to locate here. And when you look at the rising housing prices in San Francisco and in New York and in more densely populated urban areas, Atlanta becomes a great option for people who want to live in an urban environment, but they don't want to feel like they have to make $3 million a year just to be able to make ends meet.
Well, I think that's absolutely the case. And I know we've seen so many funds now looking to invest in Atlanta companies and bringing companies here, in large part because of the great publicity for successes like Cabbage. So Cabbage as a successful company, obviously from the outside looks very successful, but also groups like Glassdoor, which is an online site that basically gauges employee support for a company, have been very reflective of the fact that Cabbage has a unique culture, which is very different from probably a lot of financial institutions. Tell us a little bit about that Cabbage culture, maybe even starting with the name, which in and of itself is fairly unique.
Cabbage, if you Google Cabbage with a C, means money. And so it's a Dust Bowl era metaphor for cash. Give me some cabbage. And Cabbage with a K, when we started the company, was $1,200 to buy the domain, and Cabbage with a C was $75,000, and we didn't have any money, so we went with Cabbage with a K. And ultimately, we like it. People always say, "Oh, is it because your name starts with a K?" And that's not why. That's just a funny coincidence. But culture has always been important to us, but not in the way you think. We didn't read a book and that said, "Oh, well, you have to have this mission and values and vision statement, and you have to have 5 things that define your culture." For us, it was really just we wanted to go work at a place where we could be ourselves and have fun and work with people we respected on work we thought was important. And we're really, really lucky that we've been able to do that. And the culture is really owned by the people at the company more than it is by us. I would say the overarching theme to our culture is care deeply. And you'll see that all over the place if you walk around the office. And it's caring deeply about one another, of course, caring deeply about our customers, caring deeply about investors, and about our community. And you see that play out in all areas of the company. We just want people who are self-aware and thoughtful and care about each other.
It's a great culture. And let me reflect back on your background a second. Maybe that probably helped you establish some of that culture. There's an interesting question that's been asked, probably by some folks in our club that have children who are English majors or thinking about English, being English majors. And you went to a fine institution, Furman University, you were an English major. But the question is, now that you're a tech star, would you have majored in anything else in college? Tell us a little bit about the background there and what your thoughts would be as far as advice in that area.
I was a major hopper. I majored in psychology. I majored in theater. I was briefly an econ major. I just was like, I don't know what I want to do. And then I was like, I know how to read. I like reading. I'm going to do that. And so really my only career path I thought was just to become an English professor, because what the hell else are you going to do? And so that is sort of the direction I was headed. I was just lucky that my parents had got me a computer in 1979 when I was 9 years old. So I was, when the opportunity came knocking, I was really comfortable with this idea of using technology to make our lives better. And so I think it's important to know how to communicate. I think knowing how to write and how to read and how to speak clearly and concisely is a really, really valuable skill. And you're going to get that in the liberal arts environment. My 20-year-old, he's a music and philosophy major, a sophomore at Emory. And so I'm excited that he chose philosophy as the other one, because I think, again, the ability to think critically and to learn how to express your thoughts, those are all really, really important. One thing I wish I would have done differently is I would have taken a couple of finance classes. I think that would have been really, really valuable, and something I think liberal arts schools should require of all of their students, sort of like med schools are now offering business classes, because owning your own practice is great, but you got to understand how to pay the bills and, run the finances of your business.
Well, Kathryn, you've done a remarkable job here in our community. You have been a great supporter of technology companies. You've built an outstanding company in Cabbage with your co-founders. You have shown your love for Atlanta and your commitment to our community, and we couldn't ask for anything more. And I think you're an inspiration, not just to those of us in the club, but to so many entrepreneurs who may have been tempted to move somewhere else, but to see the opportunity to grow a business, to find your co-founders, to find the money, and grow that company here in Atlanta. So congratulations to you on a remarkably successful career. You're very humble and modest in your comments today, but you've done a great job in building a unicorn, selling it to American Express, and being so supportive. So thanks for being a part of our program today and for being such a loving Atlantan. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, John, and everybody else.
Thanks.
And let me just echo Kathryn, John's gratitude. So thank you for joining us. And listening to you chat, two other quick questions came to mind, if you don't mind me just asking real quick. So we do have this ecosystem of FinTech in Atlanta that it works for startups and taking up to unicorns like yours. Does in the other capitals of the world, I mean, does everyone recognize that ecosystem to the depth that we have here?
No, I don't think so. I think we're unique and we're sort of steeped in it, and I think that's why we tend to recognize it more than other folks do. Change is coming. I think there's always an opportunity to change and broaden that messaging.
Well, and one other question too, just, we're in this pandemic and, we always wonder what's going to change and what's going to stay the same. In your view, what comes out of this from a FinTech perspective that is lasting in terms of change, and what is overhyped?
Okay, I think that I'm going to answer the second one first. Bitcoin, dude, I'm so tired of cryptocurrency, just so tired of it. So that, and then, damn it, I did it again. I forgot your first question.
No, just what's going to come out of this?
I think digital engagement with your institution, that's what's going to change permanently. People are like, why am I going to deposit checks at the bank? Why am I going in for a wire transfer? What is even the point of this branch thing? What's this cash? Why am I using that? I think those are the things that are going to change, and I think it's really accelerated through COVID.
Well, thank you for joining us today. This is just an engaging, fun, and highly informative program. So we appreciate it. And John, as usual, well done on moderating, and thank you for bringing Kathryn to us.